instructor in this Introduction to Psychology, Introduction to Cognitive Psychology specifically. Before you get a picture of me, before you get a look at me, I want you to listen to me for a few minutes and then make some guesses about me. Surely you can tell that I'm male, I hope, that I'm slightly nervous, but what else can you determine? What else can you determine just from listening to my voice? Can you guess, for instance, from where I am from in the country? From somewhere around the U.S., where am I from? Or am I even a native of the U.S.? And if I'm from the U.S., what region? Where did I come from in the country to be here in Houston with you and me? How sophisticated is the constellation of nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs that become the stars of the verbal heaven I am spinning before you? How much do they reveal about me, just in terms of the way I'm speaking, the words I'm using, the emphasis, the accents, and so forth and so on? Jot down in the notes, in the margin of your notes, that is, some notes about things that you might think you could predict from me just from listening to me. In the studio here, and also out in the far reaches where this tape eventually gets to, and it goes some amazing places, which I'll share with you later. What other things can you guess about me, just from listening to my language, my voice, and my speaking skills? And now I'm going to challenge you to make actually 5 specific predictions about me before you actually see me. For instance, can you make a guess about my weight, just from listening to me? What do you think my weight is? A strapping 525, a more modest 210, a very thin and drawn out 143. Where do you think my weight is, just from listening? Secondly, how about my age? 25, advanced graduate student forced into doing a television course. 65, or 95 and brought out of retirement in order to teach this class because of pressures on the faculty. What about my race? Black, white, red, yellow, green? What race am I? Fourthly, what about my nationality? Where do I come from? And what about my hair? Long or short, light or dark, curly, straight? What am I going to look like when you actually see me? Now, lest those of you who are off campus become thoroughly convinced that your TV set is totally mixed up, let me ask the director to correct the problem that I asked him to create right here in the studio. That is, let's look at me now and have a look at how well you did on your guesses. Okay? Nervous? No. I have an intention tremor. There's a slight jiggle in me all the time. Don't worry about it. I'm not as nervous as I sound. I never am. But it is there all the time. I inherited it, got it about 5th grade, and I've been stuck with it ever since. So when I get excited, then I really come unglued. But relax. Don't let it worry you at all. It doesn't bother me. Secondly, my accent. Where do you think I'm from? In studio. You're going to have to get on mic to do that. No credit unless it's on mic. Where do you think I'm from in the country, just based on the way I talk? See, I'm paid, so I can outweight you. So we'll have a silent stretch until somebody wants to venture a guess. Where am I from?
Kentucky.
Not bad. Not bad. Wrong, but not bad. Not bad. Anybody else? I did this one time. I actually participated in something like this in a graduate class at the University of Tennessee where you had to take, I think it was 6 hours outside your major just to broaden yourself a little bit at the PhD level. And I took a class in speech pathology. And the instructor was about 65 at the time and very confidently strode to the front of the room and started her lecture by saying, if you would talk for her for 30 seconds and pronounce any word she wanted, she could guess within 2 counties where you were from. Well, not being a wise soul at 22 or 25, I decided to challenge her. So I challenged, and she guessed. She started at Chicago and guessed concentrically around it and never overlapped any area of the country I'd ever been in. Because I'm not Midwestern, which is what it sounds like. I was born in New Jersey, raised in East Tennessee, which is how close you were, but it was in Oak Ridge, which was the atomic city. So although it was in East Tennessee, we were not subjected to East Tennessee twang and Southern drawl, but rather a very cosmopolitan U.S. kind of background. And so the net result was that I end up with what my humbled speech pathology teacher ended up calling Generalized American, with a very slight Midwestern twang. But I went from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, to upstate New York, Schenectady. And that also has a very flat accent as an area. So through 12th grade, and in fact 16, because I went to Rochester, through 16 grades, I was only in a very flat language area. And so it just kind of flattened out into general nothing in terms of accent. So I'm very hard to tag in terms of where I'm from. What else did we ask you? Weight, little over 210, but it's dropping, and I'm working on that. So you'll just watch me melt away here as the semester goes on. Speaking of melt away, these tapes are relatively timeless and supposed to be that way. So you're probably sitting there watching the tape now in perhaps early June, which is one starting time, or perhaps mid-late August, which is a second starting time. We are actually taping these in a spring semester starting in January. And for the first time in about 10 years, there is ice on the ground outside in Houston today. So I'm doing my midwinter urban kind of clothing today. I will hopefully do it a little more timelessly in the future, but we actually had some very unusual weather today, and hence my rather hot clothing. Age is 65 and still growing. Weight's dropping, age is growing. Race is Caucasian, nationality is U.S., and so forth. Now the point there is, and it is a fairly trivial one, but when you start listening to somebody, you begin to infer things about them even before you meet them. We all do it on the telephone. I'm sure you have had the experience that I have sometimes of talking to somebody on the phone and meeting them later. And they're like 9 feet wide and 6 feet high, and you had envisioned this shrimpy little person, and vice versa. One of my favorite announcers is the Saturday evening announcer on KUHF, who has an extraordinarily low voice, which we'll talk about later. In fact, if we get a chance, we may invite him to come over here and talk to us about it, because he's got a voice that's so low, I swear he could swallow himself if he tried. It's just an extraordinarily bass voice. But what you've engaged in there, in listening to me when you couldn't see me, is a process of identifying aspects of a person that are based on his or her language. And you and I communicate a lot about who we are just based on the language we use and how well we use it. This is going to be one of the topics that we'll be discussing in this Introduction to Cognitive Psychology, Psych 3350, which is what you've just tuned into. So this isn't what you meant to tune into. You may want to go over to the Discovery Channel or something else. But in general, all of us in these kinds of interactions are constantly observing behavior. We're doing it all the time. We're primed to do that. We're educated to do that. We're bred to do that. We use very small bits of information and very subtle cues that you and I are emitting all the time to make inferences about one another. And we're also deciding who we like and who we don't like based on those kinds of observations. And we're looking at how smart someone is. We're also judging that. We make all sorts of judgments on people about remarkably little information. When you and I go into a cocktail party, what we often tend to do if we don't recognize anybody in the room, we scan the room, and then we tend to go where the action is, where people are laughing, and just get in with happy times kind of thing. But it's just one of the many processes that are involved in cognitive psychology, which is going to be our focus here this semester. It's also one among many processes, your language, that rely on your memory and your skill with language, and also your ability to solve problems. That is, these processes we use in judging people are exactly the same that are involved with memory, with our use of language, and with the problem-solving ability that we have and develop as a function of our language. These are all topics that we're going to discuss during the course of the semester in this course on cognitive psychology. What are your goals for this course? I'm going to talk about mine. I've got 3 or 4 of them laid out here, but I want to give you a moment to jump in. We're going to have another 30-second timeout period here for quiet while you think a little bit about it. But if you're watching at home, what I would suggest you do is perhaps put the TV on pause for just a minute and develop your own answers before you hear some of the students in here, fellow students, offer up what they're after in this class. It is a high enough level, 3350, that people don't tend to just wander into it casually. I wonder what if. And they tend to have fairly specific career goals, as you'll probably hear here in a couple of minutes. But just put me on pause for a minute. Not that fast. Put me on pause for a minute and think a little about what your goals are in taking the course. Why are you here, and what do you want out of the course? In class here, in studio, why are you in this class? What are you looking for? 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. What are you looking for? Why are you in this class? Okay, it's required in the psych major, I'll give you that. What else? It's actually a selective, it's one among a limited number you can draw from. What other reasons? What career goals is this building you toward? Yeah, press the button on the mic.
Am I doing it?
You plan to teach, okay?
And since it's a required course, I heard it is a really awesome class anyway, so I'm really excited about taking it.
Thanks, Mom. Okay, so it does obviously contribute to teaching, and one of the things we'll be looking at is problem solving and things related to what you face on your feet in the classroom all the time. Somebody else? We heard from the far right. Let's hear from the far left. So you had this idea that I am knowledge person I just dumped to you. Isn't the way it works. It's interactive. Yes? Okay, I heard about half of what you said there. Are you on the mic?
I'm going to law school.
Law school, okay. Psychology is a very good major for leading into that kind of a career, definitely. I have discovered that my son, who is 16 now, turns out to be extraordinarily good in debate at Bel Air. And it looks like I may have produced a lawyer here. I have an MD and a PhD among my children so far, and it looks like I may yet produce a lawyer. You remember Shakespeare's comment on lawyers? But for one, we'd need none. Keep that in mind. But there are plenty, so you'll be safe. Good. Law. What else?
I'm going to be an occupational therapist.
Got to press a button, or we don't recognize you.
I'm going to be an occupational therapist.
Okay.
So working with patients, basically I have to know how they're feeling and kind of encourage them and motivate them and kind of have a background as to where they came from.
You have to stay on the button when you're pushing. We'll get everybody educated here gradually. Okay, but yes, occupational therapist and interested in cognitive processes and motivation and so forth, topics in general, which we will also cover here. Good. So you get a feel for the kind of range of reasons that people end up coming into this class. And in the course of the time here, I think if you read in the index and the table of contents, I should say, in the book that I'll be requiring of you here, you'll find that all of those topics and many more besides are covered. This is, I teach Intro Psych, as many of you probably know, and that is covering everything about half an inch deep. We're now going to look a lot more deeply in cognitive psychology, but given the nature of cognitive psychology, it has almost become the experimental psychology of its time, covering a wide range of areas. So yet again, we're going to cover an amazing array of topics during the course of this semester. Everything from mapping your way, cognitive maps from one place in town to another, and we may develop an assignment out of that, to the issues of short and long-term memory. Quite a range of activities. From my side, what I'm going to do is to focus on the study of normal cognitive behavior, not abnormal, but normal. And what I'm going to try to do is to develop and refine the manner in which you both observe and analyze both your own and other people's behavior, specifically cognitive behavior, often language-based. But those are going to be the key things that that's the key thing that I'm trying to do. We're going to be looking at perceptual processes, among others. We're going to be looking at memory and how that operates, and there have been some amazing advances in the last decade or two about our understanding of memory, and some marvelous books that I will be recommending to you as the semester wears on. I think we'll try to come up with a reading a week for you, or a recommended book a week. I've just thought of that as I'm talking here, but I think that might be a good idea, because there are some really good books out there now, very challenging ones. So we'll look at memory. We'll also look at imagery. And therein hangs a problem, because people tend to think of memory in terms of words, memorizing a telephone number and being able to recall it when you need it. But there's very good evidence that you and I also remember pictures. And as we'll see a little bit later in the semester, one of the more interesting studies, to my perspective, that was ever done involved taking somebody's high school pictures and showing them to them again 40 or 45 years after graduating from high school equally intermixed with other people dressed the same way from a different high school, and asking them point blank, did you go to school with this person, true or false? So you expect 50% accuracy, pure chance, and people were in the low 90s in being able to accurately identify as much as 4 decades after they'd been in school with them, people that they had gone to school with. Just an amazing demonstration of the fact that we do, in fact, also store images. Not all of our memory is language-based. Some of it is picture-based, image-based, and various other types. Bike riding, for instance, is neither of those. It's an internal motor memory kind of thing. So we're going to look at each of those in various ways. We're going to look at imagery, as I said. We're going to look at general knowledge, how we store it, how we retrieve it, how we integrate it, how we use it. If I give you a word association task like fruit, that defines a concept, and then you reach in and pull out your favorite, whether it's orange or apple or pear or kumquat or whatever it may be. But we'll have some information on why it is that we choose the words we do, going all the way back to the relatively unsophisticated concept that was done 50, 60, 70 years ago, where they simply counted the frequency of word associations to a given word as a measure of its meaningfulness. The theory being the more associations it had, the richer it was in terms of the links that it could make in your memory. We're also going to look at language as a key element there, both in terms of its acquisition, that is how we learn it, but we're also going to look at some of the many complexes that are built on language, things such as creativity, for instance, which we'll look at a little bit, and that's going to actually play a role in the independent project assignment I will have for you. I'm going to wait until the next tape 2, to talk about the general mechanics of the course, simply because it often takes people a while to get into this class, so I'm going to delay it to the second day before we talk about that, but I will get into grading and the exams that we'll be using and the independent project that we will require of you and some helpful hints on how to do that, and so forth. We're going to also look at problem solving as one of the uses to which we put our language and our brain. We're going to look at reasoning, and we're going to look at decision making. All of those will be topics that we will spend at least a certain amount of time on, and then the logic that is studied particularly in philosophy, but we'll look a little bit at logic and what kinds of cases you and I can argue easily and what kind of cases we can't argue easily simply because our brain isn't handled that way. Are you aware, for instance, that short-term memory, which has traditionally a limit of 7 units in it, we could argue that, but arguably 7 units memory, has been overloaded a bit when you start looking at the telephone numbers that we now use in Houston and many parts of the country that have now suddenly jumped to 10 digits in direct violation of research done by Bell Labs 50, 60, 70 years ago to document that 7 is the preferred number for memorizing telephone numbers. Well, you know the way we've handled that. Of course, if you watch people in the stores now, when you give them your telephone number, what they tend to do is just put 7/ if you're in the 713 area, or 2/ if you're in the 281 area. And again, it's an attempt just to shorten, first of all, the writing, but secondly, the memory load. All you have to know is it's core or it's slightly further out, and now we've added 832 on top of that. The whole thing's going to collapse one day. But what's going on there is basically an attempt to shorten the part that we do have to remember, which is typically pray for the area code and then try to remember the number. So in terms of my goals, I have 3 primary ones that I want to try and cover here with you. First of all, I want to try to introduce you to what psychologists can contribute to your knowledge of cognitive psychology. That is, what have we discovered up to this point? What do we know? And what can we talk to you about in terms of cognitive psychology? Secondly, what I want to do is to share with you the kinds of behaviors that are studied by cognitive psychologists, because they may do everything from give you a map of Houston and ask you to get from here, the studio, the University of Houston main campus, to Galleria. And it turns out, I had a student do a study, which I will share with you when we get into looking at maps, that simply reaffirm quite conclusively that men and women navigate differently. Men tend to do it abstractly, not everyone, but men in general will give directions to each other, go east on Cullen, turn north on 45, go west on 59, go north on 610, west on Westheimer, and hang a left, and you're at Galleria. Women, on the other hand, tend to use markers, okay? And so what they will tend to do is tell you, go to Fingers and take a left off of Cullen. Okay, get on the expressway, go to the triple billboard. I don't know whether it's still, I think it is. See, I don't pay attention to markers, but there used to be a huge three-sided billboard at the intersection of 59 and 45 up on the northwest corner. See, it's a male. description, on that corner, as you're driving away from the university. And that's the kind of markers that women tend to navigate. And I didn't believe it when the student came in and said she wanted to study this, and it was true. It was about a 4-to-1 margin of men preferring abstract directions and women preferring anchored to markers kind of directions. They both work. It's an interesting, one of the few things that I'm aware of in cognitive psych that is sex-driven difference in terms of the way we use the facilities that we have. So we're going to look at the kinds of behaviors that are studied by cognitive psychologists, hopefully improve your understanding of those. Thirdly, we're going to look at the terminology and principles that cognitive psychologists have developed to describe the phenomena that we study. And fourthly, we're going to look at the techniques and procedures that they use in conducting those studies. Those are kind of the general lay of the land of what we're going to cover. Secondly, what I'm going to try to do is to have you gain an additional appreciation for the lawfulness of human cognitive behavior. Much of what you do, I can predict. Given our studies of cognitive behavior, I can predict what you will do in given situations. I can tell you, for instance, that the reaction time, if I gave you a word association test, how rapidly you could give me an answer is a direct function of how many other people give the same answer. Surprisingly enough, one of the shortest reaction times between stimulus and response is table chair. And that's related to the fact that chair is the association that people give to table. Good speakers of English, about 85% of the time. It's one of the most dominant associations in all of the English language. And thus the reaction time when I say table in a stimulus to get chair as a response is very short. If I say to you truth, that's a word that has, it's very meaningful, but it has many different associations to it, and it takes us a little bit longer to click through to one and offer it up in that situation. So that's just indicative of the lawfulness of the way in which you and I do something even as simplistic as produce word associations. I say here, have you gain additional appreciation because of the fact that I'm assuming that you already believe in the lawfulness of human and animal behavior. I talk about that back in Intro Psych, so I'm going to assume that battle is already won. And finally, what I hope to do is to demonstrate and relay to you some of the practical applications, the skills that you can, that may be helpful to you in day-to-day living and in learning and problem solving and so forth in the future. So every now and again I'll stop and kind of do a highlight on what I see as a practical application in a given area. So in short, all of this is going to fold into what is called an introduction to cognitive psychology, with one significant difference for many of you. And that is, it's offered by television, okay? And so basically, when we start, well, now I've got to figure out how to advance my screen here. Shows you the advantage of not having, there we go, I found a button. Okay. The difficulty with this course is the fact that for most of you, it's offered by television. And television generally tends to be associated with large lectures. There are problems with large lectures, at least there can be. For instance, one of the biggest problems is that direct contact seems to be lost in this situation. It's hard to question me if you're sitting at home with a tape recorder. A little easier here in the studio. But for the most part, it's a difficult thing to do. There are ways to get around this, however. First of all, as a solution, what I would like to suggest is that most of what I cover is in the assigned text. It's either in the Matlin text, which I'll be talking about, or the course notes that have been developed for the course. Secondly, another thing that you can do is to discuss the material with friends. It might be very helpful to you to locate somebody else in television land who's taking the course at the same time as you are, and form a work group with them, or at least the ability to exchange numbers with them. One of the things that a student of mine did a number of years ago, which I thought was quite ingenious, is that he walked around with a package of cards for about 2 weeks, and he listened in class. He watched fellow students interacting in class, and he tried to pick out what he thought was the best student in a given situation. That is, the smartest student or two in a given class. And what he did then was to give that person his business card with his name and telephone number and email on it, with the agreement that he would be quite willing or he would like to be able to call that person if he had any problems or something he didn't understand, or he had to miss a lecture, which we all have to at some time or another. And he wanted to be able to call to get the notes or to answer the question, whatever happened to be important in that situation. And he did that exchange with several different people, and by the time he graduated, what he'd basically done was to network the University of Houston. He had people in all the different classes that he'd been in, so he never had a problem. If he missed a homework assignment, he always had somebody he could call. So what you do is just link up with a couple of people, name, telephone number, and email in each class, and then you've got a perfectly delightful way to solve any problem of what was that assignment, when was it due, and so forth. Third thing you can do is talk to the instructional television assistants who will be working with me. They will normally be listed on your course syllabus unless, like this semester, the course is A, heavily enrolled, and B, relatively late in organization. So in this case, what I will do is email each of you the teaching assistants' names with their email address, and they are instructed to answer. So if that doesn't happen, by all means get in touch with me, but they're quite good normally about responding to your questions. So if you have a problem, by all means utilize the email for which it is invented, and it can be very helpful. As a last resort, call me. I'd rather have you email. Actually, it's much more efficient for me to email you because email has become so dominant in my life that I'll sometimes go 3 and 4 days before checking messages. So if you need an answer, email. And one favor I would ask of you is that if you email me, in the subject line, just put the course number, 3350, okay? Because that will key it to a particular point in my box, and those are the first emails that I answer are course-related emails. So if you do have to write to me something, don't put the subject of what you're writing about in it, just put 3350 in the subject line, and it will get you an answer a lot quicker. Those are ways to the absence of direct contact. Another one, of course, is to visit during office hours. That's another way. I swear the highest unscaled mountain range in the world is the door jamb of a professor's office. It is so seldom scaled by people to visit. In intro, at the end of the semester, I ask, about a third of the people have ever come to visit me. I have office hours, 5, or in fall semester when I have a lot of students, 10 hours a week, and they never come visit. It is as if I'm on one side of the Gulf and you're on the other, and we're kind of throwing information at each other, but we never actually do face-to-face stuff. So don't be afraid to come talk to us, professors. Make us earn our money. We like to think we do research and service, but the legislature actually pays us to teach. So make sure we earn our money. Second situation and problem is that the television is fleeting. It's here 1 minute and it's gone the next. For instance, you've now been watching me flop around here for the better part of 30 minutes. Answer a question for me. Am I or am I not wearing a ring or rings? And the question then is, as a yes or no vote by show of hands in the room here, you got to vote one way or the other. How many of you would say, yes, I'm wearing one or more rings? Okay. How many would say, no, I'm not? Okay. All right. Well, the answer is yes. The second question then is, how many? 1, 2, 3, or more. How many would say one ring? Figuring, he looks marriageable. How many would say 2 rings? How many would say 3 rings, including the one through my nose? 4 or more. 4 or more. Okay. Well, the correct answer is 1. Remaining question then, and I know how this is going to go, and I'll show you an interesting change in human behavior here. We're going to vote on color. Is it gold or material? Gold, silver, or platinum or other? Okay. How many would say it's gold? How many would say it's silver? How many would say other? Okay. Well, it's gold. Now, you notice the preponderance of votes for gold. By show of hands, how many of you are actually wearing silver jewelry? Okay, it's not as pronounced in this class. Maybe there's a drop-off. But in the freshman class, when I ask that question regularly, the vote always goes for gold. That seems to be the most common element for ring material. But when I ask how many people are wearing gold jewelry, where the vote is like 4-1 for me wearing gold, it's about 50-50 as to whether people are actually wearing gold or silver. So there's a lower preponderance of silver that I'm used to, and I always strike it as funny that people end up voting that I'm wearing gold, even though they themselves are wearing silver. But in any case, the point relative to all this is that the information is going to be going past you fairly rapidly. It is structured in such a way that you're going to have topical notes. You'll have a topical outline of everything I'm talking from, so that will make keeping up with it easier. Secondly, we're going to try to package them. We're not going to try to. We will package it in 75-minute units. for you, so you can even stop midway. Do 37 minutes, which might be the outer limit of your tolerance, and then view the other half of the tape. I would strongly recommend in tape 1 against viewing 10 tapes and taking an exam, viewing 9 tapes and taking an exam. 9 times 1 1/4 is a whole bunch of hours. I am boring. After 13 hours of listening to me straight, you will be sound asleep with your nose pressed against the screen. Don't do that, okay? Spread it out. The assignments are spread out that way. I'm going to assume that you will take the obvious hint and make sure that you stay current and read a little bit every week. We'll show you data on the value of distributed practice before the end of the semester. So watch and listen carefully, critically. Take notes, but listen and analyze to what's being said, and then ask a friend or ask one of us if you miss anything. That should help with the fleetingness. There are then also some, well, I'm having trouble with the buttons here. We'll get fleetingness as our second example, which I've just talked about. And then secondly, we have some mixed blessings. A primary one is simply that the information flow is going to be remarkably rapid, and it's very condensed because we're using television also. We will try to keep the lecture material organized into 75-minute intervals and units. I will do the best I can to do a complete topic in a given day, today's goal being an introduction, and I'm not sure I'm going to get through it all, but we'll try. Secondly, the material will be built around specific objectives for each of the lectures. The information that is critical is generally going to be spaced out, spread out through the tape. So I'm not going to give you 7 critical things and then jabber for an hour. I will try to give you the critical information spread out through the time. And we'll also be using drawings and slides and other forms of special demonstrations, basically as aids to understanding what it is that we're talking about. I'll give you some memory tests during the course of the semester and show you in predictable ways how you screw up, and in other predictable ways how you can be extraordinarily good in retaining information if you want to be. But don't forget the underlying point that they're really intended to reinforce or convey. So when we're off in the middle of a demonstration, remember to tie it back to what we're talking about, because that is my intent. And finally then, we'll also have some sheer delights, one of which is closeness, okay? Closeness is one of those things that we'll have an effort, make an effort to achieve. For instance, when I'm sitting here at the desk lecturing to you, have you ever been this close to your college instructor? So they're going to set up and give you a wide-angle shot of me, and we will have a general look at how you probably see a college instructor most of the time. If that's true, have you ever then been this close? And we then move in a little bit closer. Okay, let's push that to the extreme. Have you ever been this close to your college instructor? Well, if so, all I can tell you is, don't tell your mother. But one of the advantages of television is that when we need to get up close and personal, we can do so. And we'll use that as necessary through the course of the semester. Second thing that will also be very good in this class, based on course evaluations and so forth, is the visual aids. I've been doing this long enough that I've assembled quite an interesting array of visual demonstrations. One of the classic demonstrations of instant memory, sensory memory, right on the surface of your eye, relied on some computer work that involved presenting an image for 1/20th of a second and taking it away, and then discovering amazingly that later people are able to recall, even though they've been overloaded with 12 or 15 pieces of information, they can recall a subset of it quite accurately. Well, I have found a way through PowerPoint with a lot of play to be able to replicate that, so we will actually produce that in the program here and show you, let you practice to see how much you can actually retain when you're overloaded with 1/20th of a second of information, and yet amazingly, you can recall a large amount of it when you're asked cued shortly afterwards to do so. So we'll be able to use the TV in that case to help you. So the visual aids, I think, should be very good. They're highly evaluated as a portion of my introductory course, and the portion of those we're using will be like what we're doing in the developing specifically for this course. Third thing that you will find is quite good are the 2 texts that we're going to be using. One is Introduction to Cognitive Psychology, and the other is Matlin's Cognition. Those 2 books I'll do show and tell for you here a little bit later, but those are the 2 required books for the semester. And Matlin's book, for instance, has for years been the best-selling intro psych text because she folds into it some very interesting demonstrations, which we will utilize with you. That is, or we will encourage you to utilize as you're reading. So she will every now and then stop and suggest a task for you to do as you're reading, and it will be something to relate specifically the content of what you have been reading about. So I hope you will enjoy that and use the book as it is intended. That is, to interact with it, to teach you something about cognitive psychology. So ours for the semester is going to be this introduction cognition book by Margaret Matlin. And if you could go full screen here for a minute and show this book, I want to talk about it for just a minute. Try to get it so that it isn't shining on you. This is the 6th edition. This is the latest currently available edition, which is in the bookstores, and that will semester by semester always be true. At some point, if the tapes outlast Matlin, which has happened a couple of times, the book may no longer look like it, but it will be Matlin's Cognition that we are using as the course text. And the syllabus over on the right side will have the assignments in this book represented on it each time. So it's Matlin's 6th at the moment, but this is dated 2006, if I remember correctly, 2005. So this will probably die and go to another edition so they can make money and get rich off you. Wish I could figure out a way to do that someday. But in any case, this will be the course text that you will be using. For those of you who are viewing at home, you may want to get a copy of that book and keep it nearby as you're viewing, because every now and then, rather than replicate something here, I may reference something in the book. We don't yet have copyright broadcast permission, so I can't show and tell at the moment, but there may come a time when I will refer to the book, so you might want to just have it nearby when you're viewing the tapes. There are also a number of other books that can be used, and I won't be using these, but there are a number of others that could be talked to you about, or that I could recommend. One of these is by Smith and Coslin. It's the first edition, actually. It's a new book, but the two people are very well known in cognitive psychology, so my expectation is it will be good. And at first blush, looking at it, it does look to be a strong book. Cognitive Psychology, Mind and Brain, in its first edition, and that one is published by Pearson Publishing, Prentice Hall specifically. That's another good one that you could use. Robert Salso, and I could not, in frantically going through my bookshelf this morning, find the current edition of it, but I'm 99% sure Robert Salso has a newer edition of his cognitive psych book, which already in 2001 was in its 6th edition. That's also a good one to consider. Another one is this book by Stephen K. Reed, Cognition, Theory, and Application. This is actually in its 7th edition already, so this one has been around quite a while as another possibility. And I'm suggesting this because maybe you and Matlin don't get along well together. So if not, any of these other books in general will tend to cover the same kind of content area, and you can certainly use that one in lieu of the Matlin book, which is what I have selected and will require for the course. And the final one is Robert Sternberg, whose name we're going to see a number of times during the course of the semester here. Very active in testing and also in cognitive psychology. He's now published the 4th edition, 2006, of his cognitive psychology. That would be another way to go through this material that we will essentially be using. But as I said, the book that I am specifically going to require in the course is Margaret Matlin's Cognition, simply because the field has very clearly endorsed it and likes it a great deal. And so I think that would be a book well worth you getting and putting on your shelf forever and ever. It's a good book. It's written at a good level. It covers a wide array of topics and should be very beneficial to you in learning the material in the course. Another thing you can do, and I checked, and unfortunately the Matlin text does not have it at the moment. There has in the past been a student study guide that accompanies that book, and you might want to consider getting that, or maybe go pressure John Wiley and company to produce one for you, because I think they can be very helpful. It's a learning style that some people are much more comfortable with than simply reading the material and trying to cold hard memorize it, which is not always the most effective way to learn. This one, unfortunately, the Matlin, the one drawback and the one hesitation in adopting it was that it does not have a student study guide. But it does have the interactive features, and it's got review features built into it at the end of the chapter, so it should still be good. All of them in general will include general notes about what they're writing about, questions and various kinds of demonstrations and so forth. So hopefully you can use Matlin to good effect. The second thing that you also need to have to survive, sorry, I got ahead of myself in the notes here. To Two other things. I will try occasionally to bring some people in to interview as we have experts on our campus or at Rice or who have time to come over and talk to us. I'll try to put in some interviews of 5 or 10 minutes just to loosen things up a little bit and get another person's perspective on some of the things that we've been talking about during the course of the semester. So the guests and the demos are the kind of things in the ratings that have typically also shine relative to this course. So those, I think, are the major strengths that we will have to offer to you in this course. Now, when we look at hints to survive and thrive, number one, of course, is the text, which we have just talked about. Those are required, and the two references for you are this one. Matlin's book is Cognition. It will be the latest edition, currently the 6th, but it may be the 7th or the 8th by the time you're viewing these tapes. And the other is a topical outline of the course, which right now looks like this, okay? The cover itself will not change. The color will change by semester because the notes themselves, also the syllabus and so forth, may be modified. But this is the topical outline, and in here, as you will see, it is basically a topical outline of everything that I'm going to be talking about during the semester. I don't know whether you can see the diagrams there, but anytime I've got a diagram, in this case it's parsing sentences, how to do that will be shown in the book here. See, because I can remember with my trembling hand and lousy writing, I used to have a miserable time in college when somebody would slap up a diagram like that one. And me trying to draw it then, it was impossible. And if I did get it drawn, it was illegible, so it was useless all the way around, which is the main reason I developed this, so that you'll have a topical outline of everything that I talk about during the course of the semester, right in the course notes here, which are at the other bookstore. Here on this one, for instance, today we have talked about introduction of lecturer, importance of constantly observing behavior and so forth, course goals, yours and then mine, television classroom, problems and blessings. We've then gotten into requirements for maximum benefits, and we're right in the middle of textbooks, which is what we're talking about here now, all listed here for you. So it's written specifically to parallel the notes that I'm offering you, or what I'm talking from in offering my comments to you. So first thing we need is the text. Second thing we need is notes. And the way we're going to do notes is going to be slightly influenced by the Cognitive Psych book, the textbook, Cognitive Psych, the book, which I have for you. But you can also take a good set of notes in that it's already set up as a topical outline. And that is the recommended way to take notes. That is that you do it topically. If I see I say good morning and I hear pens scratching, I know I've got a student who's not going to do well. Because you do not record notes literally. What you try to do instead, and by the time you're in a senior level course like this one, you should know that what you're recording is the flow of the logic. It's not so important the specific examples as it is the general flow of the information. That's what's captured in the Cognitive Psych, the book. But what you want to do is record the key concepts and the flow of logic. Definitions and terms are crucial in any course. And I always apologize in the intro psych, because it is such a heavy memory course. There's just no way to get around it. Until you can talk the discipline's language, you can't talk the discipline. This course has a little bit of that problem, but not as bad, because it's getting into higher level stuff, and basic definitions like stimulus and response, I presume you already know. Independent, intervening, dependent variable, and so forth. So we're building on that, and thus we don't have that much memorization to do. But the terms that are important in the Cognitive Psych, the book, are highlighted and italicized. What should you study for exams? Terms and definitions are clearly one, so we highlight that for you as a hint. When you take notes, there was a technique developed in a book that I'm about to recommend to you here. As an aside, that'll be this reading for today. A technique was developed at Cornell about half a century ago now that has a lot of wisdom built into it in terms of how it's organized. What it recommends you do, if it isn't already organized as it is in Cognitive Psych, the book, is to take a sheet of paper on which you're going to take notes and draw a line down the page about 2 inches in from the side of the page, from the left edge, okay, top to bottom. 2 inches in, a line vertically, I mean. And then secondly, what you do is to put another line across the bottom of the page about 1 or 1 1/4 inches up, 1 1/2 inches up from the bottom of the page. And now we're going to use each of those 3 sections differently. We've just wasted 1/4 of the page. I'll give that to you. You can put love notes there or something. You're going to put your notes in this section. See, we left the biggest part for you, just where you've always done the writing anyway. But we're going to organize it a little bit differently in this case. What this system recommends is that you take the notes as you always have, recording the flow of the logic and so forth, and the key to this system, in my way of thinking, is the second element. And that is, what this system heartily recommends is that the next thing you do is to take those notes home and before the next lecture, you recode it. So if you've written 200 words in the book, you're going to put maybe 5 over in that left-hand space. Written so you can do it. I mean, don't do it sideways up the page, but just flat across the page. Write about 5 code words that will allow you to read those words and remember what's on the page. That is, those are essentially the recall cues that you're developing there. The first A I ever got in graduate school was in a statistics course taught by a classic in the field, Lindquist of Blomers, I'm sorry, Blomers of Blomers and Lindquist, which was one of the early books on analysis of variance. But he was a shy man, and he had 3 panels across the back of the front of the room that we were looking at. When he came in the morning, he simply came in the side door right to the first board and said good morning and started writing. I never saw the front of his face. I wouldn't recognize him on the street if I saw him today. We saw the back of his head and his hand flashing on the board writing. And he wrote his entire course. Well, because it was statistics, because he was talking fast, and because it was obviously covering a lot of material, I took a lot of notes. So I wrote that entire book. But of course, again, the tremor and my lousy writing, I had to go right back and sit down in my office and recode those notes. What I actually did was recopy them. The only drawback was it became such a good set of notes that everybody borrowed my notes to study for the test, but that's a separate issue. I got an A in that class, and I am not naturally statistically inclined, okay? But I did it, I'm sure, because I took the time immediately after class to sit down and go back over the notes. That's what this system is recommending, what the Cornell system is recommending. Essentially, the advantage of this is that if I can abuse some of my own notes here, if this is what you've written on up here, what you're going to do is to recode it and put it here. The advantage of that is that then when it comes time to review for the test, you've got, 50 pages of this you have to look at? No. If you've done the recoding, you have 50 columns of that you have to look at, and that's all you have to look at. As long as you can use this information to recall the information that you want to retain, the details of cessation of the Confederate States or whatever it is you're studying, this is all you really have to study. And then if you can't remember from this, you can go back and do this. So you've got the answer key here, but you've created an efficient storage outline for this, okay, for the information. If you can do this, think of the efficiency. You've already coded it in such a way that now, reviewing this, you've got the ability to recall the information much more graphically or much more easily in that situation. And finally then, at the bottom of the page is where you put questions or potentially comments. Excuse me. I reorganized one portion of my introductory class lectures because of a comment that a student made at one point. And the longer I thought about it, the more I realized that she was right. And so I reorganized the material in terms of presenting it in a more efficient and understandable manner. So don't always assume that the lecturer in any class is a world expert. We faculty are paid to offer our professional opinions, studied, formulated, shaped, and put out as lectures. But it's not the only version. One of the reasons I'd like to have some guests here during this semester. So be willing to challenge any instructor. We get on a roll because we've spent a lot of time putting this all together and we want to get through it, by George. But the fact is that in order to learn it, you may want to argue with it occasionally. Take another point of view, and you will learn through those arguments. One of the valuable skills you need to learn in addition to reading and writing in college is arguing, discussing, doing a counter argument, and so forth. So that the place to put that is down at the bottom of the notes in that system designed by Cornell. Alternatively, if you haven't yet gotten your cards out and found 2 people that you can communicate with in class, you may want to use the bottom there to ask a question. If the instructor says there were 3 primary economic factors leading to the Civil War in the United States, 1860 to 1865, and you get home doing your recoding and realize that, oh my gosh, I've only got 2 here. Well, then that's a real good thing to put down at the bottom of the notes, because many classes, particularly this one, are cumulative. Many classes are cumulative. And so what we study at the end of the semester is going to depend on your having mastered what's at the beginning of the semester. So a good thing to do in any class is don't fall behind. And one way to make sure you don't do that is when you sit in class before class starts, there's always a quiet time. Go through the last day's notes and see if there are any questions in there that you need to ask. And they'll be right on the bottom. Or if you've got an argument you want to pick, same thing. Put it on the notes, and then you're reminded when you get into class of what it is that you wanted to talk about. So, those are the note situations. The second thing I want to do here in terms of studying is a favorite of mine, not because you haven't heard it before, but because you constantly need to be reminded. And that is, in addition to doing the notes, you've also got to have a plan of study. Okay? And the reference I'm going to recommend for you here is by Deese and Deese. It's called How to Study and Other Skills for Success in College. Many of you will know all this information, but this is the kind of thing you might want to read as a review, just to remind yourself how to study and master material. And one of the major things they do in there, which I have always enjoyed as an activity, is to develop a plan of study. And the first thing you have to do there is to know how you're spending your time now, okay? So what this starts with is a schedule like I'm outlining here that's hard to read on the screen, but basically I can describe it for you. It has the days of the week across the top and the hours of the day down the side. And then what you're supposed to do for a week, and I would recommend this next week maybe in school if you've never done this before. It's very instructive as an activity. Write down everything you do for a week, okay? When I have students that come into class and fill it out in a hurry and hand it in the day of the demonstration is due, they've not achieved the purpose of it. It really is not being done for me. This is being done for you, and I will not collect it in this class. This is a 3,000 level class. This is a reminder. But in essence, what you're going to do there is not take detailed notes. Like on my screen there, it just says, went to grocery store. That's not the idea here. The thing is about an inch wide normally, so what you're going to do is use a simple word like, not that, eat. Okay? Eat, we can put in the proper space. And that you can recall later. It's because, again, this is a record of your behavior, so it shouldn't take a lot of details to remind you what you did. And in general, if we take all the different things that you do as an undergraduate, there will be eat, sleep, and sex. And you'll find room for other words to describe whatever else you're engaged in. But just keep track of that for a week, okay? Keep track of it for a week, and then summarize it. And you'll find, if you just count up the hours that you're engaged in, eat, sleep, driving, studying, in class, work behavior, recreational behavior, don't forget some of that, and one or two others, you can pretty well capture the day that most academic students spend. Tally it up and see how you're spending time. And if you decide that you're not spending time the way you want to be, don't fix it all at once. Well, I only studied 6 hours, I meant to do 12. Don't change 12 hours on that day, okay, that week. It can't be done. It's too much of a jar. But if you found that Tuesday, Thursday you studied from say 2:30 to 4, add 15 or 30 minutes at 4 o'clock. You can squeeze another 30 minutes out of it. So you're now doing, instead of 1.5, you're doing 2 hours. You gained an hour just in that one subtle shift, and it's just extended slightly the time that you demonstrated the previous week you could spend. If on Saturday you studied from 9 to noon, make it noon to 9 to 1. Add another hour there. And if you move about 3 hours a week, in the course of 6 or 8 weeks, in the course of 2 or 3 weeks, you can move 6 or 9 or 12 hours. That'll make a big difference in how you spend your time. The only difficulty, of course, is you have to take the time away from things that you would otherwise be doing. And that's depressing because the most sleep-deprived population in the world, college students in the United States. You are challenged with so many things that you have to make priority decisions. You have to decide what you're going to do beside eat and sleep. And that's where that schedule can be very helpful. In fact, what I would recommend is that after you've done it for a week and seen how you spend the time, you might want to copy down in ink the study time on the next schedule and do it again for another week. But this time, then add in pencil anything else you did. From the first week, you know when you've got time for studying. But now write down that time in ink and then redo the schedule and see if you can actually move 6 or 9 hours over the course of 2 or 3 weeks and really get control of your time. Because other than reading and writing, I think time management is probably the next most vital skill that you will develop in college. Now we're finally going to go back to the screen that's been away from us for a couple of minutes, and that is to talk about a study technique called the SQ3R. How many of you are familiar with that technique already? SQ3R or some variation of it. Okay, well, for the other 99% of you, then, let me go through it here for a couple of minutes. The number one element, the first S in this, is survey. Okay, what it is suggesting that you do when you learn or read material is survey it first. How can you survey material? You're doing a reading assignment. How do you survey it? Suggestions. What's one way to survey material? Don't forget to be on the button on the mic there. Push that and then you can talk. Go ahead. Okay.
You look at pictures in bold print.
Look at the
Pictures in bold print.
okay, pictures and so forth. You can do that. My reaction to that in general would be that if we're going to be reading, we need to look at the print rather than the pictures. But that would be one way to do it. That's at least going to have you paging through the material. Another suggestion.
Which button press?
You can look at the table of contents.
Table of contents is a very good way. That's what's another way to see the table of contents? There's one other place where that's reflected. If you don't look at the table of contents, where could you go? The chapter itself. That is the table of contents in most of the introductory level texts, and I think Matlin is typical in this way. There is at least an outline of the chapter at the beginning of the chapter, or it's at the beginning of the text in the table of contents. They usually go through what's called C level in writing a text. So that's a good way to review it. A radical way, there's one other way that you've missed that is not obvious, but is actually quite good. In some ways, the most effective. What's one other way to review the material other than actually reading it?
You look at the summaries in the back. You look at the summaries in the back.
Yes. Go to the back of the chapter, and there's a summary there. In most of the general texts, such as Matlin, there will be a summary either sprinkled through the chapter or at the back of the chapter. So you read the summary first. Now that seems like it's cheating, doesn't it? I can't read the summary. I haven't read the chapter yet. Quite the contrary, that's the best time to read the summary, because what that provides is what we're going to talk about in this class as an advanced organizer. It provides for you in your head an outline of what it is that the authors think is the most important stuff they're telling you in their text. So read the summary first. That's a very quick and dirty way to get a good review, a survey of the material. Okay? Now, the second letter is, I keep punching the wrong button here, Q. Ask questions. That seems kind of dumb, doesn't it? Why should I ask questions? I haven't read the material yet. Well, it provides a very effective device for you, and that is it's an advanced organizer. If you read the material, or at least read the summary, ask yourself some questions. In other words, read to better yourself. Read to find information that you're interested in, and that's exactly what asking those questions does. It personalizes the material for you. Do you remember how boring history reading was in 11th grade, or physics in 10th or 11th, whenever you had it? Mainly it was the absence of meaning that did that to you. You weren't in the material. Yeah, it was required, okay, I'll take it. But you just weren't in that material. Well, one of the ways to get yourself into the material is ask questions before you start. I'm only talking here maybe 5 minutes total, survey and Q, okay? But that at least sets it up in a way that you can master it perhaps more effectively. First R, I've looked at a lot of formulas for mastering college material. I have yet to find one that doesn't involve reading at some point. So you're going to have to read the material. And then, recite. I would in fact argue that recitation is the key, based on having read the Dease book, to mastery of material. And I'll tell you why. If you think about the way, again, class show of hands, if you think about the way you study in a typical semester, typical class, typical course load, sometime in March or in October, how do you split time between reading and recitation? Reading obviously is input, and by recitation what I mean is really any form of output, whether you're writing or memorizing terms or anything that involves working with the material. How do you split the time? How many of you would split that time in a typical hour, say 50-50, 30 minutes reading, 30 minutes of recitation? By show of hands, how many of you split it 50-50? Okay, how about, say, 2-to-1, 20 minutes reading, 40 minutes of recitation? Okay, 3-to-1, 45 minutes, 15 minutes let me say that again, 45 minutes, what did I say, 20 minutes? I'm getting lost here. Try it again. 2 to 1 was 40 minutes of reading, 20 minutes of recitation. 3 to 1 would be 45 minutes of reading, 15 minutes of recitation. How many of you would go that route? Okay, and 4 to 1 then would be 12 minutes of reading, 48 minutes of recitation. How many of you would go that? It's the other way around. I screwed it up again. What I'm doing is dominance of reading, 48 minutes of reading, 12 minutes of recitation. Okay, then now we'll go the other way, and hopefully I do it right. 2 to 1 now, or 1 and 2, is 20 minutes of reading, 40 minutes of recitation. How many would do it that way? 1 and 3, 15 minutes of reading, 45 minutes of recitation. And 1 and 4, I'll get it right, 12 minutes of reading, 48 minutes of recitation, is the recommended ratio. In the Dease book, developed at Cornell, the recommended ratio in mastering college-level factual material is a 4 to 1 ratio favoring recitation. Those are the 2 key elements, reading and recitation. For your own benefit, I was encouraged that when I ask in intro, and don't screw it up as I did in going through the recitation here, I will normally get the vast majority of votes, dare say 95%, are in the half that involves more reading than recitation. And I was very encouraged to see here that some number of hands went up when it was even 2 or 3 times as much recitation as reading. So clearly the lesson is getting out that the way you master the material is with recitation. But the recommended ratio is 1 hour of input for 4 hours of practiced output in whatever form, whether you're doing class notes or reviewing vocabulary or creating vocabulary lists, as long as you're working with the material in some way. Recitation is key to making this work, and that is also the reason that we suggest that you study 3 hours out of class for every hour in class. There is a reason for those various statistics. And finally then, review. And what that means in review is that you are really, truly doing that. That is, the learning takes place in this formula, in reading and recitation. And from that, when you're reviewing then, getting ready for an exam, you truly are doing that. That is, you're going over information that you have already learned in reading and recitation, making additional links to other sources and other courses and so forth and so on. And finally then, let's think about your desk for just a minute, where you normally study. How many of you can reach a telephone or a radio sitting where you normally sit to study? Number of hands are leaking up as you think about it, so let's say half of you can do that. I would suggest that you move away the radio and the telephone. Put them where they're not immediately accessible, so you have to physically get out of the chair before you can reach them. Because, contrary to rumor, as we're going to demonstrate here during the semester, having a radio on does not help study. It is another source of input. It is rivaling for your attention. And anytime you're humming along on a song, you're not focused on whatever it is you're trying to study. The only case where noise might be helpful is white noise in an area where there's noise. A very effective way to cover that is turn between the FM stations, crank the amplitude up so that you've got static. But that's the only noise that should be on that will be helpful in mastering material, unless you're studying French or something like that. But in general, it's just urban legend that having a radio on is going to help you. I'm still working on my 16-year-old to convince him of that. Yes?
What about your computer? If you're using it to study, can that also be a distraction?
It can be, if you're not on the right screen. Yes, but theoretically, at least, the study tools are being used to aid the study that you're engaged in. But specifically with radio noise, turn it off. Another thing, how many of you can see from your desk memorabilia of past trips, or there's a rose from high school senior prom, or there's something or other is hung there related to memorabilia and stuff you've done in the past? Show of hands. And the rest of you are lying, right? Okay, get it away. Take it away. How about the surface of your desk? Is the surface clean? Does it have what you need on the desk, and that's all? Or is there a stack of what you didn't quite get done yesterday? Is there the grocery list for tomorrow, and is the letters to Aunt Irma and all? Is that there too? What you are to do when you get home is form your arm like an elbow, put this flat on the desk, and scrape that all off into a box. seal it, mark it memorabilia, and go back to it when you need to. But get it off the desk. Okay? The purpose here is that what you're doing is structuring yourself so that you can study. Okay? Now, we're going to sit you at this desk that is denuded of any distraction. You're going to have the book you're reading, maybe something to take notes with, and that's it. And now you're going to study. Now, if you do a lot of reading when you go to bed, that's probably not good, because what you've trained yourself to do is pick up a book and fall asleep, which is not adaptive for college. So, when you start studying at that desk, if you start nodding off, the good Lord is telling you, you need more sleep. Go take it, not at the desk. The worst mistake a student makes is go over in the library and fall asleep. Very comfortable chairs, but what they're doing is setting up so the next time they sit in that chair with an important assignment to do, they fall asleep again. So what you need to do is, if you're going to fall asleep, take time out. Set the alarm for 30 minutes, take a 30-minute nap. It'll refresh you and you'll get through the assignment. Do not sleep at the desk where you study, ever. Okay? Don't write letters to Aunt Irma at that desk. Go do it somewhere else. So the point is, when you're sitting where you study, that's all you do. You just study. Okay? So relative to your desk, there are two things we want you to do. First of all, we want you to clean it. And secondly, we want you to only study at it. What you're doing there is conditioning yourself. If you haven't developed that skill yet, it may take a while. It may take you a month or more. And it'll be hard. You will be thinking of all the things you should be doing. Don't do that. When you're at the desk, just concentrate on studying. Okay? Problem, you're in an apartment with 4 other people whose rent you can barely afford, so you have to study at the dining room table. That's fine. Face yourself into the least distracting wall or view, whatever it is. I don't know which direction it's going to be, but you'll know. And always sit in that chair. If the 4 of you eat a meal, sit somewhere else to eat. So that basically when you're sitting in the chair that's looking at the study wall, those are the cues you're getting. Okay, this is my study position, I'm here to study. And what you're really doing is just conditioning yourself to always orient toward that task when you're facing that wall. So there are ways to get control of our environment and to actually use it to our benefit in this situation. Good sources. Let me talk about those for just a couple of minutes for any kind of ideas. I'm going to suggest a number of books, the Dees and Dees book being one that we recommended today. But there are some other things that can be very helpful to you. Scientific American will do an article a month or every 2 months or so on something psychological. Normally one of the main indexed articles is on some kind of a topic. So if you want the hottest cutting-edge stuff, that would be a good source to go to. Another couple of magazines, Psychology Today is sometimes good, sometimes bad. The editing has, over the years, been rather uneven on that. But every now and then they get a very good article in there. 2 that I would recommend to you that might not occur to you right offhand are the New York Times and the Washington Post. Both of those are very good papers, and both of them produce science sections. That is, Sunday includes a science section, and every now and then, if you'll keep an eye on it or borrow your friend's copy or something or other, you will find that they do articles on a purely psychological topic, whether it's short-term memory or aphasia or you name it. And they'll have, a dozen experts of all different caliber writing about that topic. That can be a very exciting source of information. And keep your eye out for other sources, even things like the Smithsonian Magazine. That's hard to do at the end of a lecture. Smithsonian's Magazine is another very good source. Less often purely psychological, but even they get into memory sometimes as a topic. So all of those can be very helpful in terms of sources of ideas for any course, not only this one. And finally, then, I want to spend the last 4.5 minutes talking about an article by, or some work done by Luella Cole Pressey that was actually reported in that book by Dees and Dees in 1994. So I have not read the original article, and I will beg off from that. But what she did was to take 50 good and 50 poor students at a major state university and ask them a series of 22 questions where she found significant differences as to how they answered those questions and implicitly the way they studied their material in college. Okay? Good students, she indicated, are less likely, first of all, and I'm going to list about a dozen things here total, to be able to think of things that would prevent them from doing their homework. It's kind of a mindset thing. They're just less easily able to invent reasons why they aren't going to get their homework done. Secondly, this is right on target here, They are less likely to have a desk that is cluttered with other work, a radio, a telephone. Thirdly, they are less likely to figure that figures are just pictures, and their goal is only to read the words. We had that comment earlier related to pictures. Those are, in fact, important to the content of the material. Good students are less likely, I'm going to nail you with this one, to stay up late, especially on the night before any exam, especially an important exam. They are less likely to stay up late in that kind of a situation. Number 4, they are less likely to memorize text without trying to understand its underlying theme or message. Less likely to memorize text without trying to understand the underlying theme or message. In fact, point 5, they are less likely to memorize anything, because what they do is to understand it, thus not requiring memorization. You may have been amazed, as I was, with your math teacher in high school who could actually start with a given and derive the theorem that he needed. That is the level of knowledge that we strive for, to be able to understand the underlying things that allow us to generate predictions for experiments, ideas for experiments, understanding of material, and so forth. Number 7, I think it actually is on the list I'm generating here. Good students are less likely to have the right answer, but to put it in the wrong place on an exam. In other words, good students read the instructions. I have a standard quote that I use for people in intro. If all else fails, read the instructions. Because on the exams I give, the instructions for what I need and want are all right there on the page. Number 8 or 9, I've lost track. Way down on the list, good students are less likely to have their note-taking limited by their writing speed, because they rarely copy verbatim. They record themes, concepts, and general ideas, not verbatim. And finally, ending on a positive note, good students are more likely to study in the same place. Do you see some repetition in what we're talking about here? Good students study every day. Good students plan their day. Good students use charts and drawings in their reading and use them until they understand them. That is, those drawings and figures are there for a reason. Good students are more likely to look up words in a glossary or a dictionary. I failed to do that when I was reading a newspaper article over the last break, and it has been running me crazy now because I can almost remember the word, but I haven't been able to retrieve the spelling. It was a remote word that I was kind of interested in, and I didn't stop and look it up exactly when I came across it, and now I'm bearing the consequences. Good students are more likely to skim their reading before doing the reading. Good students are likely to preview by skimming ahead, the table of contents, the body of the bold words, or the summary. Good students are likely to read the summary before reading the chapter, outline their lecture notes, write chunky reading summaries, outline their reading notes, and so forth. We will pick up our discussion next time in this continuing introduction to cognitive psychology.